Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It's Francis, and with me today I have another author. I love to bring the book writers on here. Travis Klempan, who wrote 2 books so far, one of them that I have read, Military Metaphysical Mysticism. I'm loving it. Travis, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Francis. How are you?
I am great. So I wanted to bring you on because there's a lot of books that have been written about, the war on terror, the last 20 years and everything. But generally, they're written by a lot of navel-gazing officers who want to, sell you their 10 ways that they learned how to, do business because they got shot at in Fallujah somehow. But there is a small gathering group of kind of like a maybe historical fiction is maybe where I would put this. Not necessarily Harry Turtledove, but a little something different, a little fiction inside of this. So first off, let's talk about your military background. It looks like you were in the Navy, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. So in the Navy, but writing about soldiers, how does that work?
Yeah. So just to give a brief overview, I was enlisted for a couple of years. I was a hospital corpsman, what other services call a medic. And I volunteered at young and 18. They asked for people to volunteer for service with the Marines. And I said, hoorah. So I was a Navy corpsman with the Marines, got picked up for a commissioning source while I was in, and then 9/11 happened. So my time serving alongside Marines was tough but uneventful. After commissioning, I was on a ship, did a couple of deployments there. And then at the time, the Navy, and I guess the Air Force were sending a lot of folks on individual augmentees, the IAs. People were getting snatched up out of everywhere heading over there. And so I kind of to get ahead of the train, I volunteered for one in lieu of a second sea tour. And they sent me to Iraq for a year. I wore, the Army ACUs, which I guess are not a popular uniform, carried a sidearm the whole time and put together PowerPoints. So again, very uneventful.
Sounds like a deployment. What year did you deploy to Iraq?
I was there almost the entirety of 2009.
Okay. Yeah. Shit. Where were you?
I was at Camp Victory in the Al-Fa Palace.
Okay. I was down in Basra.
Okay. Yeah. There were always folks asking me to, hey, you want to, hop down to this base? Hey, you want to go over to this base? And I didn't want to be a war tourist. I didn't want to put anybody at risk. We got a little bit of training on what to do in convoy or in those situations. And I said, I'm not qualified to go, popping into people's places.
Look, I was public affairs and I did that shit all the time. Okay. So you're fine. Cool. You would have been I spent a lot of time being like, hey, can you kick one of your people off of the convoy so that I can get in there so I can take pictures?
Nice.
And I had more than one lieutenant kind of look at me funny, but I was like, the colonel said I get to go. Yeah. I get a gun too, so you're fine.
Yeah. It was a odd year. It was the year that Stephen Colbert came to Baghdad to do his, week of live performances. We got all the USO tours. And like I said, I put together PowerPoints for the Army. Nothing against the Army. I guess they didn't have someone to do that, or maybe it freed someone else to go do something more kinetic.
It didn't. Somebody just didn't want to do it.
Yeah. Since I volunteered, I was able to pick follow-on orders. So I thought I was going to do shore duty in Hawaii, and then actually ended up going to sea more during those 2 years on my shore tour than I did during my sea tour. And then I got out. So as far as circling back to your question about Navy guy writing about the Army, my own experiences, like I said, they were interesting. There's funny little sea stories here and there. Nothing that I think was noteworthy. And it's also, the events in this book didn't happen, at least in the way that, I portrayed them. Yeah.
I hope not.
Not in the way I portrayed them. So I wanted to explore some of that stuff. And I had talked to guys, and, a lot of the characters in there are composites, fabrications, what if this guy had done this instead? So, applied the fiction writer's license to a lot of the stuff that I'd seen and heard and talked to people about, and then came up with a story.
Yeah, it's an interesting story that you put together here. What compelled you to, one, to get into writing, but two, to write specifically about experiences in the military?
Yeah, no, I guess writing generally, I've always felt like a compunction, storytelling. I'm not a very good verbal storyteller. My dad, for instance, he can tell these really long, interesting stories that captivate people, and they never really go anywhere, kind of like a Shaggy Dog story. But I've always enjoyed writing things down. I've always enjoyed reading. And when I got out of the Navy, I was processing things like everybody else, not, nothing to the level of, traumatic events or anything, but, trying to figure out where it fit and what I was going to do and what I was going to do next. And I had the GI Bill. And so I was like, there's writing programs. That's kind of cool. And it was really just kind of a series of weird events led to the creation of this novel in particular, and then the follow-ons that I've put out and I'm working on. Yeah, there's a person I was dating at the time, and she said this really offhand little phrase, and I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And that spun into what was at the time kind of a short story. I've turned it into realized, there's more going on here. There's a chapter going on, and a chapter implies, a longer story novel.
A second chapter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so then the throwaway phrase, can we swear on your podcast? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, okay, cool. It was that Harper Lee is full of shit. And it's the line, it's fairly early on, and it's about To Kill a Mockingbird. We were watching, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Gregory Peck's character says, it's a sin to kill a mockingbird because all they do is sing. And my girlfriend at the time said, that Harper Lee's full of shit. And I was like, what do you mean? Mockingbirds, all they do is, root through garbage and eat stuff and, throw trash all around. And so that kind of formed the scene towards the beginning where John is waiting with the soldiers. Their trucks have broken down on the way to the airfield, and he's watching some mockingbirds, go pick over a dumpster outside of Dunkin' Donuts. So it was like kind of a weird thing. And then I realized that okay, if he's waiting, what's he waiting to go towards? And then when he goes there, what's waiting for him back home? So kind of, I don't want to say it's a mystical writing process. Every writer has their own thoughts on how they write, but it was a series of observations and willing to see connections where maybe their, connections weren't as easy to put together. And then it crafted it into a story and then worked on it over a couple of years and finally got it published.
So the story that you lay out here, you mentioned To Kill a Mockingbird. Also referenced in here is the Divine Comedy, The Good, the Bad, the Ugly.
Yeah.
So, and is that kind of, are these also draws to this? Because I love Dante. I love the Divine Comedy. I've read it multiple times, even not just the cool Inferno parts,
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of writers really kind of delve into Dante because he had this great mix of I can write the story, but also I can put people I hate in hell. And how awesome is that?
Yeah.
So something that not a lot of people understand is it's just one big grievance poem about this guy fucking sucks and he's in hell now.
Yeah, so political. Yeah, you wronged me 20 years ago. Here you go. Enjoy getting your head chewed off by a demon.
Yeah. So where else do these, you've got books and you've got movies kind of coming into here. Like I said, Good, Bad, and the Ugly is also referenced, the trilogy there. Why put that in as well?
Yeah. In a quick plug, there's also Ray Bradbury, the illustrated man. Yeah, and part of it's the character John is, he's a college dropout, for lack of a better word. In the story, he had done a year at college, then 9/11 happened, which is about where I was. And, a lot of the prior enlisted guys in the commissioning program were like, we got to drop out and get back out to the fight. And, they're like, no, this war is going to be going on for a while. And it wasn't like they were going to send us over immediately anyway. So that was part of the exploration. Okay, if he's in college, what's he studying? There are a lot of war movies and books where I love infantry platoons as depicted in fiction in literature, because there's always, it is a cast of characters, right? It's there's this guy, there's, Tex, and there's Brooklyn, and there's the wisecracking guy and the smart guy and all that. And so John is kind of the well-read guy.
I've always said that that an infantry platoon is where you're going to find the smartest guy you've ever met in the Army and the dumbest guy you've ever met in the Army.
Yeah.
And I ask a lot of the smart guys, and they're just I don't know, just to see if I could do it.
Yeah.
And they do it for 4 years, and okay, I did it. I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's enough of that.
Yeah, world experience. I once rode a Greyhound bus across country just to say I did. Kind of not the same thing, but yeah, there's that. And I told folks in my creative writing program in grad school, the military is also a lot more diverse in a lot of ways than these elite institutions where I found myself. So yeah,
the military is the only place that you're going to see a guy dressed as a cowboy, a guy dressed as a banger, and a guy in a button-down shirt and khakis, and they're all going bowling together, and they're the best friends ever.
They're all out in liberty. Yeah, absolutely. So so circling back to so in that vein, John is the literary guy, and some of the other references, Good and Bad and the Ugly, he gets introduced to from Sarah, who he meets, halfway through. So it's, a lot of it's little nods and stuff, kind of like the Dante thing of I love the Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and so I put that in there. But there's also the symbolism between the three-way duel, the so-called Mexican standoff at the end of that movie with the climactic scene at the end of Half Snakes. And so it's I call them resonances or connections. My grad program was very into, it was a very woo-woo is what, Buddhist hippie school.
Sure.
And, but a lot of it was very powerful about finding those connections and the journey into and out of, hell, but also purgatory and paradise and everything informs Dante and informs, the protagonist there. And it kind of bookends John's journey because he stopped reading it before the events of the story and then picks it up. It's the last book that he picks up, at the end of this book. book. So it's all kind of external, but still influencing the things that are going on. So it's all swirled together and all connected. You know, the illustrated man, he's reading the short story while he's waiting outside the medical tent. And then when he, goes to the music festival back home in the States, there's a guy covered head to toe in tattoos. And so it's like he's kind of seeing a lot of these correspondences and resonances everywhere. So I'm glad you picked up on that. And I think other readers have, and other readers have mentioned other things. So yeah, just kind of situating it, and also a little bit challenging. People, without any experience in the military may have conceptions of bunch of grunts, bunch of knuckleheads. Oh, some of them are really smart, and some like to talk about classical music, and some like to talk about this. So opening up the perceptions a little bit, I guess, too.
One of my favorite soldiers on my last deployment, he always came across as a meathead because he worked out all the time, and he was a big guy. He was a great soldier, very patriotic, and we would, if he was not on duty, he was either playing Madden or watching Dragon Ball Z. Like, he had the entirety of Dragon Ball Z on DVD sent to him so that he could just watch it all the way through constantly. Yeah. So,
wow.
The military is a diverse, it's full of people, and every person is different. So it's going to be filled with people who love it and they want to go do more of it, and they want to go, kick ass and take names. And then there's a lot of us, pogues that are just like, I just want, my 9-to-5 paycheck. And the thing is, me as a staff sergeant and an infantry staff sergeant make the exact same money, but I get air conditioning. So,
Yeah. And you don't have to deal with a lot of the knuckleheaded, I guess maybe different flavor of knuckleheaded stuff, depending on you guys.
Yeah. The unit that replaced us had to be broken down and rebuilt because their entire senior staff was sleeping with each other. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily PAO. That's just Army in general.
Or just people. Yeah. People do crazy stuff.
So why the metaphysical important to this? Why go, there's a lot of different ways, obviously. And to you, when we were talking, I had mentioned The Militia House, which is a horror book. Yours, I don't really feel fits horror. It's not meant to be. It's not scary in a horror book, but it is metaphysical, right? There is battle of good and evil. There are, kind of ghosts talking to John, but it doesn't have that horror thing. It doesn't have a Call of Cthulhu stuff to it, but it does still have, like I said, this battle of good and evil. Where is that coming from? Like, it's Iraq. There's already a battle of good and evil going on, right? Like, why throw this in as well?
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, part of it, was, from a purely functional standpoint, you'd mentioned before, like, I think of the stuff that's the writing, for like, it's not all literature, but all the written stuff that's come out of the war on terror, right? From the Americans' perspective, at least, you can fit it into, like, there's the LinkedIn stuff where it's like, hey, the 10 tips on the guy who survived an IED, like 10 tips on how to write a business. Okay. And then Brian Van Riet had an essay several years ago where he delineated between like blue state war stories and red state war stories. Mm-hmm. And there's those like, just go way back, like the Dick Marchenko sorts of, novels, or the high speed operators kicking in doors, kind of novels, like, and even, like memoirs where it's like, oh, I went over, I did my stuff, I blew up a bunch of guys and shot a bunch of guys and came home or whatever. A gross oversimplification.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, every Navy SEAL book is basically that. Here's the people I killed, and also here's how you two can start a business. Yeah.
And then there's, Brian Van Riet called like the blue state, Matt Gallagher, Phil Cly, like some of those other ones that are like more like, esoteric, introspective, closer to like literary fiction, or, stuff situated, exploring some stuff. And even Matt, who, I've corresponded with several times, has been a great help. His book, Empire City, was, kind of it was like, superpowers in, an otherwise, sort of normal world. And so there are those like minor explorations where in like, in Militia House, like you said, is more in the Lovecraftian sort of horror. And so, and I hadn't known about it until after I'd published this one, but the metaphysical aspect, I think, like I said, from functional standpoint, kind of, okay, it's a little different. I can use it as a selling point, right, to distinguish myself from other war lit, but also I think allows some exploration where I think it's pretty clear that, the ghosts, that John encounters are influencing him in some way, impacting him in some way, whether or not they're interacting with the rest of the world. Like, you could read it and you could say like, oh, well, John's just hallucinating all this, or he's imagining things, or assigning, mystical motivations or motivators to otherwise normal events.
Yeah. He could just be dehydrated.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, get some, get your Camelback.
Yeah.
And, and there's many things about, human psychology of, seeing symbolism in things. You look at an electrical outlet and it's like, oh, that kind of looks like a face. And it's like, does it really? Or is your brain kind of filling in the details, and so is John seeing these things that he can't otherwise explain or accept, deaths of, soldiers, or loss of, people, and like, is he then like spinning up this big story to assign a more important or more profound sort of explanation rather than just people die. So there's that openness, I guess, to interpretation. If I were to film it, it would, if it got filmed, it's, okay, it's, there's clearly demons and ghosts and supernatural stuff going on. But like I said, it's almost all from John's perspective, the supernatural stuff. There are a couple other times where some of the others see stuff, but so much of, what you see in combat, from what I understand, is, military deployments generally, you can kind of say, like, well, that was weird, but it probably wasn't a ghost, or that was weird, and I'm just going to chalk it up as weird. But there's also a lot of the stuff I was reading while I was writing it. One of the ones that comes to mind is an Iraqi author, Hassan Blassim, wrote The Corpse Exhibition. It's a collection of short stories, very macabre stuff, very, some of it is, more supernatural than others, and some of it's just kind of creepy. And I'd read about, but never read it, but I think it was like The Lions of Baghdad, and there was a supernatural sort of element to that. And so I knew there was that kind of, subcurrent going through some of, the war literature. And I think it helped me sell it to myself, if not to anyone else. So like, okay, I can write about this if I, sensationalize it a little bit, if I spin up a story about, like, oh, well, it's not just a guy going through a deployment, doing his infantry things. Like I try to get the infantry stuff as accurate as I can without it being like a Tom Clancy novel, getting bogged down in minutia. But like that supernatural element lends like an umbrella of protection, I guess, to me as the author, to say like, okay, I'm going to explore things like, the idea that a ground like the Middle East, or, when he comes back to the States, the American South, like these places that have seen generations of violence in one way or another, the ground is soaked with blood. And what does that do to, the people who live there? And you kill off a culture's storytellers. What does that do to them? And then the point is like, well, the whole world has been, kind of soaked in blood. So what kind of world did we think we're living in? And what are we actually living in? So hopefully, answers some questions and raises some others, which I think a lot of good stuff does.
Yeah, it does do something that I always think is interesting, which is give other motivations to why this is happening, right? Like at the end when they're having to go into the Nash, and the Nash is full of insurgents and they're looking for this massive IED that might be out there, and their own officers are getting wild-eyed, and the insurgents and the Nash are getting kind of wild-eyed, and everybody's spinning up, and people are being found dead in just incredibly macabre ways. And it does kind of offer this like maybe the reason for this violence, this psychosis, is some kind of supernatural force, which John even argues against at times. He's just like, no, people are just shitheads. Like there's nothing else to this. Like we're just assholes, and you metaphysical demons are also assholes being involved in our assholery. Like there's nothing. I think one of them says, I don't need to teach a man to hate. Yeah, because they'll do a man can hate on his own very easily. Yeah, and that's a very like kind of powerful message to this of we see and we start to think there is some kind of influence happening to our officers. They're getting crazed. But like I've never worked with officers who are about to walk into, a shitstorm like what you had going on here. I imagine that there were people when they were going to step into Fallujah for the first or second time, that there was a lot of people who are like, yes, let's go, let's do it, let's kill, let's, this whole like, we're going to go in there, we're going to fucking destroy them all. And it's you kind of want to like, oh God, is somebody, as like normal thinking human beings, and who don't necessarily other our enemies into they are just this thing that I have to kill. It's a person, it's a human, it's a son, it's a father, it's a brother kind of thing, which makes it a lot harder to kill. And so that just all kind of gets taken away, and it is easy to put something like this in to say like, well, this is why they're being influenced by this evil, obviously, that is also having this war. But it really, like, the way that you wrote it kind of makes it feel like, your main character has to navigate the war that he's got to deal with already. Yeah. And now there's this other war that only he can see, that he's also got to deal with. Yeah. And maybe there's crossover here. Like I know Sarah ends up saving him from an IED at one point, but at the same time, they are disconnected from one another. And even in the end, there is not just a resolution of like, well, that's it. We fought the demons and we won. Yeah. Go us. We love doing this. What you have is just like, yep, that was it. A bunch of people died and none of it really made any sense. Yeah. But I'm just kind of glad that I'm on the other side of it, which I feel is a normal kind of reaction to these large battles. And I have always said that everybody who has gone overseas has to come to grips with their time over there in whatever way it is, right? Yeah. Like one way or another, whether whether it's writing books or starting coffee companies, I don't know. But everybody's got to come to terms with it. However, so
yeah,
and I like the way that you kind of built this book up into this final act of war, of two different wars in one space, of building John and Sarah's relationship as something that seems very inconsequential. Like, for a while I was like reading, it's like, we're spending a lot of time on Sarah and I just don't know how she's going to fit into this later, until obviously you do. And I'm not going to give away a whole bunch of spoilers and everything, but and as somebody who was over there at this time, I loved reading this, because this is like, oh, you say in 2009, that's when I was there. I was also there in 04. I worked on a lot of PRTs in 04 in Afghanistan. But the way that this kind of sets up, alongside my own war, the experiences that I had, and also it's just so normal. It's just a normal, like, I was never infantry, but the nicknames and the going on leave and the shitty chaplain who's a Bible thumper, and like all these things are just like are very normal. But you managed to make like what's going to be next? What is the meaning behind this? And in the real world, a lot of times there's nothing. So I do, I tooting your own horn as much as I can here, but I do like that kind of mix that you had, where it's normal, and oh shit, everything's abnormal. And John's just rolling with the punches.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's too much of I appreciate all that. Thank you for tooting my horn. But one of the dangers was that like it was going to be like two halves of a book, and it is, it's largely normal, and then it, kind of flips on its head for the second half. And in him meeting Sarah is kind of that inflection point, I think. But like there's, and it's not too much of a spoiler to say that, John allegedly has the power to speak to birds or to understand what they're saying, right? And that appears early on. Which
I love too, because I love that there's this like idea that it's metaphysical, but like we all listen to the birds.
Yeah.
Because when the birds go away, you're in danger.
Yeah. Yeah. That kind of like that, and that's quiet in the war movies, like, oh, everything's gone quiet in the jungle. Like, yeah.
Exactly. Once the birds all flush out because they know what's about to happen, you can kind of get a like, oh shit, something, maybe we need to move a block or two over because something might happen here. So John talking to the birds, I thought was very interesting. Although, of course, us, it's just like, well, there's no birds, so this might be danger. And he's like, no, they're really hungry and horny all the time.
Yeah. Well, and even one soldier's like, well, if you can talk to them, why don't you just ask them where the bad guys are? And he's like, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And I think the other soldiers, like, if I'd have, served alongside a person who said, and I remember guys who claimed, that like they had participated in exorcisms before they joined the Navy, hyper religious guys, and like, oh yeah, this is how we did it. And it's like, you just kind of like, okay, that's what that guy says. Like if Sergeant McKenzie thinks that, he can talk to birds, okay, it makes no never mind to me. He's a sergeant. I'm just a private, whatever. So,
as long as it doesn't affect with your warfighting ability, I don't give a shit. As long as you're, you can do your job and you're not annoying me, like the chaplain. Yeah. The first chaplain was fine. And it's one of those kind of hands-off chaplains. And then you get the Bible thumping chaplain, and it's like, okay, now you're going outside of the bonds here. The whole plan here. You're fucking with me here.
Yeah.
And I did like the addition to the of the chaplain, because it seems like there's this feeling of we need to inject our, I don't know, more modern gods into it. I know, Jesus is 2,000 years old, but it feels like what we're dealing with in the book is like ancient evils, right? Things that have roamed the earth before humans even opened their eyes. So it's like the chaplain can also feel it, but he just doesn't know how to process it.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good point actually. That other Colonel Cujo, the battalion commander, he's probably being affected or infected, in different ways. And I think the chaplain, or the two chaplains, in my mind, do represent kind of like, if not modern, at least like the American way of looking at it, where the first chaplain, and I'm a lapsed Catholic.
Hey, me too.
Yeah,
culturally Catholic.
We got a big club. The first one is Catholic, and I enjoyed. Everybody has good chaplains and bad chaplains when they're in the military. Our ship actually had the Navy's only Buddhist chaplain for a while, which was interesting. But anyway,
the Army almost had a pagan chaplain.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, he was my commander at one point too.
Okay. Wow. I mean, the whole chaplain idea is just fascinating and worth probably looking into later. But yeah, the first chaplain, like you said, the more hands off, kind of quiet. Hey, how you doing, soldier? How you doing, trooper? Court sort of guy. Is Catholic. And then the second one is for lack, I guess, one of those, I'm not super familiar with all the different sects, but, he's a snake handler, backwoods preacher, kind of like fire and brimstone, sort of guy.
Yeah, I want to say somebody's going to yell at me. It's not Baptist. I feel like it's some kind of Presbyterian.
Or Pentecostal, maybe something.
Pentecostal, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, and no offense to any Pentecostals listening into your podcast or anything. But
don't touch the snakes, y'all.
Yeah. But it is that, like you said, that version of Jesus is more modern and more American. It's that, the gun-toting Jesus, wrapped in the American flag sort of a thing. And it's not super explicit in the book, but that's kind of the progression that it goes, right? You've got these ancient evils, maybe, and the Catholic chaplain is out of the picture by the time they really start manifesting. And so it's like, not that he would have been any better prepared or equipped to handle those things, but maybe he could have at least, counterbalanced some of the hyper reactions that you do see, like I said, in Colonel Cujo and the other, some of the other soldiers.
Could have been a bit more normal about it, I think.
Yeah, maybe he could have at least tried an exorcism.
Yeah, this is what I like about Catholics, is that they do seem more normal. And when I say that, I don't mean the people who became Catholics when they were 27 because they don't want women to have driver's licenses.
Yeah.
I mean, those of us who were raised in church basements eating masticholi and going to mass and everything, doing midnight mass when you're 10 years old.
Yeah. No, there's that thing that floats around social media about the raised Catholic is like, I guess St. Brendan, somebody, I don't know. And then the adult convert is, citing, very specific
reading some Thomas Aquinas and
papal bulls and decrees. Yeah. So
which you should definitely read some Thomas Aquinas. Just don't don't be weird about it.
Yeah. But yeah. So, there's that, religion could fall under that, that supernatural metaphysical umbrella as well. So yeah, that's just another way to explore it in the, on the pages is like, okay, you have, the two main supernatural forces fighting, but then you also have these other more modern, more contemporary ones. And I think it goes back to, one of your earlier points about, there's already a story of good and evil in Iraq. And then, you appended to that later with these people that you're fighting, you can other them, or you can realize they're trying to kill me. I'm trying to, survive by, ostensibly killing them, but they're also somebody's, family member in one way or another. And
to be fair, we're in their country. Yeah. We're up in their shit. So I get it if they're shooting at me.
Yeah. And so and that was part of the metaphysical thing as well, and not too many, admittedly, not a lot of Iraqis appear on the pages. There's a couple. And anytime they do appear, I try to portray them as, not caricatures, with backstories. Captain Mahood, I think, is the main one that they interact with a couple of times. And he's just like a regular guy. And he, and there were the Iraqis too, who weren't fighting against the coalition forces, who were trying to stand up and say, hey, we're tired of the violence. We want a country that, where people can just live their lives and stuff. And so, this multitude of, personalities, just, everybody's contains multitudes and society contains multitudes, but that the metaphysical, it simultaneously, I hope, took it out of the humans realm where it's like, okay, it's not good versus evil versus, necessarily Americans versus the, the insurgents, but also, like you said too, that, the supernatural people, they have powers that we don't, but they're, just a bunch of jerks as we are. They're fighting their own wars. We're caught in the middle of it. They just have abilities that the humans don't have.
Right, and they have their own limitations as well.
Yeah,
and you just need to find a way to exploit those limitations as with any other enemy.
Yeah, which and real quick, they had to have some sort of limitations, some sort of way that the humans could fight back. You see those stories where that's one of my. I don't want to get too down a different rabbit hole, but where there's the big bad guy who is so bad and so evil, and you're like, well, how are you supposed to fight against this guy? What they've done with Palpatine in Star Wars, where it's like, well, man, he can do anything. How is he even going to be defeated? Oh, okay, here's the one funny trick to do it or whatever.
One weird trick.
Yeah, so even the villains, the antagonists in this book, like you said, they have powers, they have weaknesses just like us. It's just figuring out how to do it, and it comes from a throwaway comment. 2/3 of the way in the book, and John's like, "Oh, let's try this. Might as well try something." Yeah,
and I do like that the metaphysical, the gods have their own motivations that are pretty human. Yeah. Also, what does anybody ever want but power?
Yeah.
That's the thing, whether you're scrambling to get elected or get money or you just want power. So even on this scale of this is an ancient battle of evils fighting each other, because it is still two evils fighting each other. It's it's not like good and bad, it's bad and bad, and oh shit, we're in the middle middle of it. And having this, this battle alongside the people and still having the exact same desires as the humans really kind of brings them in, kind of makes suggestions of like, well, are these, if you've read the book American Gods by
Gaiman.
Neil Gaiman, where people bring their gods to America and then they forget about the gods and the gods still exist. So you just have these old gods that are still fighting each other and just getting into our way constantly.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's, you go back to like Greek mythology and like those ones always struck me as like, okay, you guys have a lot of powers, but you're still caught up in the petty bickering and, sleeping around and messing with each other. And the humans, when, as usual, are caught in the middle of it. And I think, the evil forces in the book also don't even have like the human capacities for like love, the outlets like for creativity, where it's like power and destruction in their cases, as opposed to like, oh, well, Cujo, there's the battalion commander, wants power over the city. He wants to stop all the fighting, but like he's also a careerist and he's looking for the next promotion and everything. Whereas John is more of that like, hey, I just want to get my men back to America and then like peace out. I want to go do my thing.
Yeah, I want to not do this anymore.
Yeah.
Which I completely understand. So Hills Hide Mountains is your second book that came out earlier this year. Is it the same kind of thing? Is it still metaphysical, good versus evil, battles of supernatural, everything like that?
Yeah, no, thanks for the chance to plug it. It exists in the same universe. John is kind of, spoiler alert, he got out, this is all stuff you can read from the back of the book, but he did get out after that third deployment, and he ends up tooting around and becomes a river rafting guide in Montana, which, is like kind of...
so it follows John.
Yeah. Well,
oh, cool. Okay, good.
Well, but the main point of view character is one of Sarah's roommates, Mo, short for Mohini. Yeah. So Mohini, in the intervening years has lived her life and through a series of events, like ends up in Chicago dating this guy. And then the book picks up right when the guy breaks up with her. And it's, I really, beat myself up. I'm like, oh, another story where, a woman's story has to start with heartbreaker. It can only start, when her world ends.
The woman needs to suffer for there to be catalyst.
Yeah. But then, she does have a conversation with a different character later in the book about like, well, no, your story, started, 30 years ago and 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago. And it will go on long after, kind of meta, observation, long after the events of Hills Hide Mountain ends. That's like an observation like, okay, yeah, everyone's the main character of their own story, but your story everyone's story started so long ago that it's like, well, here's just a snapshot of that story. But so anyway, so Mo, her life implodes. She's kind of, because of the nature of the guy she had been dating in Chicago, doesn't feel like she can reach out to family or friends. She's burned all her bridges, and the ones she hasn't burned, he burned for her. That she feels cut off from everything. And the one person she can reach out to is this one guy that she met for a couple of weeks, a couple of years ago, who had been so, so nice and had connected so much with Sarah. And said like, hey, if you ever need anything, let me know. And she's like, hey, this is when I need something. So she finds her way to Montana to that river rafting company, trying to take the summer and figure out her next steps and figure out her life. And, lo and behold, there's some other supernatural evil waiting in the wilderness of Montana. So
I've always believed that about Montana. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it's a beautiful state, and it becomes like a real, look at some of the stuff that, the mythology of the American West. And, there's a lot, I think, a lot of other stuff going on. This guy who's been working at the river rafting company, also like works on Wall Street, like during the summer, he comes out, and this guy, JJ, one of the other characters, he's a Wall Street banker who spends the summers out there just kind of dinking around. And he finally just buys the outfit and like wants to reinvent the town and like make it, a new adventure destination capital of the West. And so you get all this, like, all these people moving to the West and trying to reinvent it and, in their own images or whatever. And, some of the other river rafters, kind of like a platoon of, soldiers. Like it's an odd grab bag of people, who might not be doing well otherwise, or, might, like, oh yeah, I'm on the rivers during the summer. So another assortment of characters, another series, like there's a little bit of like, oh, like the supernatural elements that John faced in Iraq, like, maybe they talk to each other. Maybe they got buddies, and maybe they got, want to pull a little revenge on John. And and so like a lot of the stuff could be explained as, well, Mo, like, are you able to do all these things suddenly? Do you have these new supernatural powers, or are you just imagining things or facing the things that you couldn't explain and are coming up with explanations to get through the day, to get through your life? And so she and John reconnect over, their past experiences and explore what that means and everything. So it's it's a different book. And in a lot of ways, it was, it was because I wrote both of them after I left the military. This one was in some ways more, it had a better, closer connection to what I've been going through. Like, how have I been adjusting to life after the, like I'm coming up on, I've almost been out as long as I was in the military. And I've got it marked on my calendar, and I don't know what I'm going to do on that day. But it's like, okay, well, it's like I'm always going to have, be a Navy veteran. I'm always going to have gone to Iraq and gone on 3 deployments. And like, what is that going to mean when I'm in my 50s and in my 70s? And like, my kid was born.
I'm 41 and don't mean shit.
Right?
I mean, you're older than me, I imagine.
A couple of years, yeah.
You joined before I did. Like, I joined in 2000 and then 9/11 happened while I was in basic.
Yeah. Wow. So it's just like, part of that, continued exploration. And then I'm working on another book to kind of further that, into the theoretical future. What would it mean if there was a world with these supernatural things? And it kind of gets more and more, like the first book, Have Snakes, it's a little bit more like in the background or up to one man's interpretation. And the second one becomes a little bit more, upfront and explicit. And then the third one's like, well, all bets are off. We'll see what happens. I'll probably stop after that with this, shared universe. So many things exist in shared universes now. I think I had to get in on that.
Yeah, the Have Snakes extended universe.
Yeah, I call it. There's a fellow writer actually does book trailers on the side too, and he helped make book trailer for both books. And we were, going back and forth, like, what would we call it? Like the Have Snakes universe. And I settled in the gift magic universe. That there's this idea of like you can pass magic for lack of a better word, but you can pass these powers between people, and they manifest themselves in different ways. And that like John's bird speak helps strengthen other people's magic, and like as a stand-in for, hey, we live in a society, we all work together, like we're all just trying to get by, but like me helping you strengthens me and strengthens you.
Exactly. Well, Travis, I appreciate you coming on to talk about your books, Have Snakes, Need Birds, and Hills Hide Mountains. Travis Klempan. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I'm looking forward to finding more stuff like this that explores our war, but kind of in, not where it's more of a set piece. I think, it's set dressing. It's not necessarily, I have to talk about the war, but in your own way, you still are, right? Yeah. Like the things that Mac has, that John has to go through. So I keep going because they've got everybody's got like 5 names. But the things that John is going through are things that a lot of people went through. A lot of the thoughts, even without the metaphysical shit at the end. The girl he really likes stopped emailing him for a while. In the middle of this, it's all things that we experience. It's just not necessarily a big war. A big metaphysical war at the end. There is always the regular war that we all had to fight, but having something else kind of outside of that really made this interesting and turned this from a war story into a story about the people itself, which I really enjoyed.
No, I really enjoy the fact that you enjoyed it, but also you gave it such a respectful and close read. And when I talk with people about it, there's always things that they have found that I didn't know were in there. So I appreciate the extra perspective and the extra reflection on this.
Well, everybody, be sure go out, get these books, read them. Travis, thank you for coming on. Everybody else, we'll talk to you next week.
All right, thank you.